My name's Deputy Inspector General of Police, Dr. Shehu, PSC. To talk about PRAWA, Prisoners Rehabilitation and Welfare Action, we have a very, very good rapport, good understanding, and good synergy between the police and PRAWA for many years. It is an institution that concerns primarily on respect of dignity and human rights, which the police are supposed to be part of it. And also capacity building to the police to enable them to perform effectively and efficiently in conjunction with the fundamental respect to the fundamental human rights as enshrined into the Nigerian constitutions of 1999. It's very, very beneficial, and at the same time in building capacity and enabling the police officers to perform credibly when they go out to discharge their duties. The police is an organization that deals with all kinds of human beings. When they come across a police officer, they deserve to be respected by police in ensuring not only their security and safety, but also in respecting their dignity and human rights. So in a nutshell, the training and retraining we are getting from the PRAWA is to enable us have police that will function and discharge their duties in a most standard and acceptable manner by members of the public. At this juncture, I want to say kudos. Welcome to the Nigeria Police Force online training.
You know, in the previous modules, we have been taking our time to really underscore the various instruments, laws, and practices that are supposed to be guiding policing elections. And I would say to you that if you as a police officer have taken time to study these guidelines, taking time to study the laws, with the back of your mind, with the intention to say in the field, you will do everything practically possible to comply with this, I think a lot of the problems that we're having in elections would be actually reduced. So this particular module, which is module 3, is looking at the gaps in the policies and the practices. What are these guidelines, what containing, and where are the practices? What is that gap? And recommending how to address this. And this is what we're doing in this module 3. Our objective for this module 3 clearly is to create awareness on these existing gaps that we have in policies and practices, with the mind of ensuring that solutions to addressing them are brought. So you will not only understand these gaps, you will understand the gaps that apply to the policies and practices, but also you will be able to understand what solutions need to be put in place. Then in terms of the outcome, it is expected that you, as a police officer who is participating in this training, will of course increase your knowledge in terms of these gaps that exist in the policies and practices in relation to policing election in Nigeria, and also how to adequately address it, Now, let's look at the gaps. Let's start with the gaps. So the gaps in relation to voting and participation in elections. So here we're making a reference to Article 2 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. So we see the issue about the gender gap here. Gender gap is a phenomenon where one gender is more likely to vote in election than the other, or more likely to participate in the process than the other. There is a need to address this gap in the level in relation to how participation of women in politics in Nigeria. So it's not, I'm actually talking about, if you look at in terms of those, and this is statistics speaking, those who tend to go out to vote more, you see a very high population of that being women. But in terms of those who get voted, you see very minimal do we have enough of women participation in politics. There's also other gaps. The gaps in terms of voters' roll. And we talk about here the issue relating to relaxation of strict registration requirements, issues relating to the need for having a proof of residence, and it's been argued that these have actually have certain effects in terms of our process. We need to also look at what are the effects on the youth who may want to vote, as most of them may also not have this proof of residence. Now, it's good to look at issues relating to the incidence of violence and electoral fraud. The consistent and the frequency of sporadic violence is something that have been recorded over the years. It's something that we also need to address very, very critically. What are the recommendations? The following are possible solutions that have been argued that would help us in addressing these existing gaps. And I will just raise some of them, but I know that in terms of discussion, you can actually expatiate on many of them. In terms of your experiences that you have already coming out from the field, you can also analyze them. So remember we mentioned about the gender gaps in voting and political participation. We said that this should be dealt with, and how. People talked about issue of the quota representation system, whereby if it operates in some countries, but in general, the question here is what needs to be done to ensure that women have more participation, more space in participating during elections. Examples of France is mentioned here. Example of Argentina, South Africa, Namibia, Tanzania, and India is also mentioned. So if you give an example and say that a particular proportion should be given for women in terms of seats, available seats, that perhaps will help to create more room in terms of this particular issue for women's participation and helping us in addressing this. There's also the point about creation of violent-free environment where people are free to assemble, people are free to associate, where people are free to speak, freely without fear of any restriction of these rights. There is also the point about respect for all human rights that we have mentioned earlier that are contained both in international documents, in regional documents, and national documents, human rights documents. It is very, very important. All the human rights principles that we know are meant to also continually being preserved and protected even during the electoral process. The electoral law should be re-examined and also to be reformed. A lot of persons have discussed this and talked about the issue of these gaps to make sure that once we do this, we will have appropriate standards in this, in terms of policies and practices, and that it will help us to ensure that the process is fair and free. Let me conclude by saying the following. During the course of this course, we have demonstrated that the exercise of the right to political participation is enshrined in international, regional, and national laws and covenants and instruments, including those international instruments and regional instruments that have been both ratified and signed by Nigeria. It was very clear that the Constitution fully provides a backing for ensuring these rights. Also, we saw the various guidelines, the guidelines that govern the operation of police during electoral process. And this also gave us opportunity to also look at even the Police Act. We looked at the Police Act. We looked at the Code of Conduct for policing election on for Code of Conduct for police officers on electoral duties. Furthermore, during this course, we have highlighted the important role that police and law enforcement agencies play and ought to play and continue to play in terms of ensuring that elections go fair and that the elections are free. But don't also forget that we took time to also look at the Electoral Act and the provisions of the Electoral Act. We concluded in our module, the third module, by looking at the existing gaps within practice and policies in terms of elections and how this can be addressed. So don't forget, Module 1 and Module 2 helped us to understand that there are legal framework that should enable us do these things as police officers effectively in the field. Whereas Module 3 helped us to look at where the gaps exist and what solutions that we need to play. And I will say to you what I've always said clearly, that it is one thing to learn these laws, these policies, these guidelines, these solutions, these recommendations, but it's also another thing to internalize them and to act them out in the field. It will be sad to see you as a police officer that have attended this particular training going out to do the wrong thing. I believe that this training has empowered you with the right information. Please do this country proud by going out there and implementing exactly what you have learned in the course of this course. Thank you very much.